But for now, I want to get back to Israel, noting that it is 2 months today since the horrific atrocities committed against Israeli civilians by Hamas terrorists on October the 7th. News today that an Australian political delegation will visit Israel this month. It'll include the Coalition's foreign policy spokesman, Senator Simon Birmingham, which of course just brings into focus how neither our Prime Minister nor our Foreign Minister have visited Israel since the terror attacks. But Australian lawyer Jeremy Leibler is just back. He's also president of the Zionist Federation of Australia, and he visited a now abandoned kibbutz where people were slaughtered and taken hostage. And a warning, some of this is distressing.
Ordinary people's homes, toys, kitchen appliances. The markings on the wall are from Zaka, who collect the pieces of the dead bodies from the army, but there are no longer booby traps. These are lives destroyed.
I spoke to Jeremy from Melbourne and asked him to share his impressions of what he saw.
The first thing to realise is that these kibbutzim really consist of very secular, left-wing, peace-loving Israelis, very ideological. They're country people, really salt-of-the-earth people. In fact, on the 7th of October, when we met with survivors from that kibbutz, who still had family being held hostage in Gaza, they explained to us that on the 7th of October was Kite Day, was a Jewish holiday, and every year they would fly kites with messages of peace and love, which they would hope would fly into Gaza and send messages to their neighbours. And so when you hear from one of the survivors who took us on the tour of the kibbutz, they explained to us this sort of sense of betrayal that these Israelis living on these kibbutzes had after the 7th of October. And what happened in the morning, there was about 8 hours when about 300 Hamas terrorists effectively descended upon this particular kibbutz, overran the 5 or 10 internal security, volunteer security, civilian security team at the kibbutz, and literally just proceeded to go from house to house, murdering women, children, anyone that they saw. Now, every Israeli home has what's called a safe room. So it's a room that is protected against rocket fire, and all of the Israelis were told to go and hide in those rooms. And some of the stories that we heard, where they would see entire families hiding in these rooms and just throw in a grenade, and you could see the devastation from this sort of behaviour, and then holding other Israelis at gunpoint and ordering them to entice other families out of the safe room so they could be either kidnapped or murdered. It is the stories that we heard, including some of the sexual violence, is just beyond comprehension.
It is just sickening, as you say, impossible to get your head around in many respects, but seeing the evidence, being there where this occurred, do you feel that these homes, that these settlements will ever be the same again? Will they be re-inhabited? Will they rebuild these homes? Will people go back there and go on with their lives? Or do you feel that they could become sort of macabre testaments to what's gone on in the past?
I think that Israelis are very, very resilient. I mean, no doubt there will be some people who will not be able to go back, that they'll just be too traumatised. But there's absolutely no question in my mind that these kibbutzim will be rebuilt. There are already discussions around it. It will take several years because they have been totally destroyed in many areas. But Israelis are resilient and they will rebuild. And I think one of the things that that have defined the story of the Jewish people and the story of the state of Israel is, in the shadows of the Holocaust, they built a state. And they built a state that was a thriving democracy that over many years and most recently became a powerhouse in high tech, in agriculture, and they will do so again. Israelis have refused to define themselves by victimhood, and while there's no question that the 7th of October has changed the Israeli psyche, I think forever. They will almost certainly rebuild, and it will be stronger. But the first thing that needs to be done is the elimination of Hamas, because at the moment there are 250,000 Israelis that are displaced from their homes, and there is still rocket fire coming both from the north and from the south. And so those Israelis, understandably, will not be prepared to return to their homes even once they're rebuilt if the threat of Hamas, who have sworn to repeat 7th of October again and again and again until Hamas is removed.
Yeah, the proximity is just incredible to consider when you talk about the deadly threat here. I want to go to some of the video you took in Israel that showed just how close Gaza is and therefore the Hamas terrorists are to the Israeli settlement. Have a look.
I'm standing on the border of kibbutz near Oz, and those trees and houses you can see there is Khan Yunus in Gaza. That's the proximity. That's how easy it was. And when they breached the kibbutz, they had 8 hours before the IDF arrived, and after they came in and they killed so many people, they just kept on going backwards and forwards, looting. Civilians came in, they looted, they stepped over dead bodies.
It just underscores your point, Jeremy, that if these two communities are to live side by side as they need to in that small country with those settlements so close, you just have to ensure that there are no terrorists lurking there. You can't live with that risk at your doorstep.
That's right. And I think what people don't quite appreciate is that the battle that is raving now, which is very difficult to remove Hamas out of the Gaza Strip, ultimately is going to liberate Palestinians from the oppression of Hamas. I think part of the trauma for Israelis, one thing is the Hamas invasion, the Hamas terrorists, but part of the trauma from the people we spoke to is that for hours, ordinary Gazan civilians on motorbikes, on bikes, by foot, crossed into Israel, crossed into that kibbutz, participated in the butchering of people, and then proceeded to steal things like children's bikes. I mean, there's video evidence of literally them picking up over dead bodies the bikes and toys of children and looting those houses and bringing them back to Gaza. And I think, this reflects the fact that for too long, Israel and perhaps the whole Western world has just hoped that things would stay quiet, and we've been too quiet about things like the educational system, the hate that is taught in the schools by Hamas. And so my hope is that once Israel removes Hamas from power in Gaza, that there is some hope that Palestinians are given an opportunity to actually have an education, a real education, rather than indoctrination, and perhaps that will be a pathway to some sort of coexistence in the future.
Yeah, Jeremy, 2 months on, so many seem to already want to forget what happened, the atrocity of October the 7th, but it can never be forgotten because it can never be allowed to happen again. Thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate you sharing your horrific experience.
Thanks for having me.